As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
Hello and welcome to Nation Watch for today, Sunday, 25th February 2024. I'm Mervyn Williams, your host. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are, and I trust that as usual, you will stay with us throughout the program. Recently, the People's National Congress Reform celebrated and commemorated the life of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, our party's founder leader. More recently, Mr. Burnham, who was born on the 20th of February 1923 and died on the 6th of August 1985, was celebrated last evening in commemoration of his 101st birth anniversary. The Burnham Foundation held a gala, and the only thing I will say to the organizers is that you need to find a venue that is at least twice as large as the one we had last evening. For viewers who are not perhaps familiar with the life of Mr. Burnham, let me just bring you into the picture. Mr. Burnham was elected leader of the British Guiana Labour Party in 1949. And then in 1950, the British Guiana Labour Party joined with what was then the Political Affairs Committee led by Dr. Jagan. And the result was the formation of the People's Progressive Party, which incidentally was named by Mr. Burnham, who served as its first chairman. Mr. Burnham served as Premier of British Guiana from 1964 to 1966, after which he led Guyana to independence and served as our first Prime Minister of independent Guyana from 1964 to 1980. Mr. Burnham then became our first executive president in 1980 and served in that capacity until his death in 1985. So last evening, in commemoration of his 101st birth anniversary, the Burnham Foundation held this event. And I'm now joined by Mr. Vincent Alexander, who is chairperson of that foundation. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Alexander. And as always, sir, it's a pleasure to have you on Nation Watch.
Thank you very much, Morgan. It's a pleasure to be here.
We will run by you, viewers, a few still shots of last evening's or last night's event. And I'll ask Mr. Alexander to tell us a bit of what went into it and whether or not he is satisfied. I'm sure he is. Mr. Alexander?
Thank you very much, Morgan. First of all, let me put in a disclaimer. I'm indeed the chairperson of the Burnham Foundation, but the activity last night was not an activity of the Burnham Foundation. It was an activity of the People's National Congress Reform. That party established a committee to commemorate the centennial birth anniversary of Burnham. And I was given the honor as chair of the Burnham Foundation to chair the Centennial Committee. And therefore, it is the Centennial Committee, in fact, that organized the event last evening was organized as the final event in a year of activity starting in February last year to commemorate the centennial birth anniversary of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. And indeed, it ushered in his 101st birthday as well, ushered in her 101st birthday. So that's the kind of background to what we were doing last night. And in fact, from February of last year, we had a number of activities, starting with a massive church service at Trinity Methodist. And we chose Trinity Methodist because of what we expected, we had. Because really, annually, Burnham's birth anniversary celebrated at Kitty Methodist, the church which he attended, the church which his father was a lay reader at, and the Kitty Methodist, in fact, school has been named the J. Burnham School in memory of his father. And then we had a number of other activities, including the NCW having a massive rally at their headquarters on Public Road Kitty. We had the usual cycle race. We had a symposium. So there were a number of activities leading up to this gala we had last night. And indeed, you're correct. We were not able to provide all those who wanted to attend an opportunity to attend because the hall space was limited. And the people were asking for tickets when we were already sold out. So that indeed we have to look in the future to a different venue for this activity, because clearly the venue is a good venue in terms of the ambience, in terms of the service provided, but certainly a small venue in terms of the number of people who wanted to attend that activity.
Absolutely. Hats off to the people who made the event possible. I was very impressed, I must tell you.
Well, I should take the opportunity to express my appreciation to the members of the committee, those members who actively worked to make it possible, and to all of those persons who attended, and to apologize to all of those who could not attend because of the number of people we had to cater for given the size of the venue.
Mr. Alexander, I want to shift into another realm of the celebration of the life and works of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, bringing the conversation to the current situation in Guyana. Mr. Burnham was himself a trade unionist. Mr. Burnham was elected president, I believe the title was, of the British Guyana Labor Union in 1952. I believe he served in that capacity until the very end, until his death in 1985. A long journey of an advocate for the working class population of a country that transitioned from colonial rule to independence and then later on to Republican status under his stewardship. We come from a long line of labor leaders: Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, Joseph Polydor, Ashton Chase, Chetty Jagan, Forbes Burnham, whose foremost responsibility, it seemed, that they assumed was to make life better for the workers of this country, to create a better atmosphere, better environment, better wages, better conditions of work. And of those leaders, Chetty Jagan and Forbes Burnham became executive leaders, executive presidents of this country. What we have now is a teacher's strike that is entering its fourth week. What we have now are successors of Dr. Jagan in the People's Progressive Party, who seem to have turned their backs on the legacy and hard work of Jagan and Burnham in industrial relations and workers' rights. How would Burnham have treated with a situation like the one we faced with?
Mervyn, allow me to cast this a little wider. Because there are those who are now claiming that the activities of a trade union are politicized and they're political activities, and are trying to portray that there has to be a distancing, trying to portray, Mark, there has to be a distancing between trade union activities and political activities. So one, the cast is wider. If one looks at the West Indies, one would see that in the West Indies, that in fact, the leaders of the independence movement, almost all of them emerged from the trade union.
Yes.
Whether we talk about Manuel Bustamante in Jamaica, whether we talk about Eric Williams and Pandey in Trinidad and Tobago, whether we talk about Bird in Antigua, as you go across the entire region,
Yes.
there is clearly a relationship between political activism and trade unionism. And in fact, in most instances, as I indicated already, the leaders of the nations were birthed in the trade union movement. So that's the first point I want to make, that we have to recognize our history and the fact that nation building and those persons who emerged as leaders came through the trade union movement, and many of them retained their relationship with the trade union movement unto their death. And Burnham and Jacob are two giants
Yes.
in that regard. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that, you know, we are really seeing a betrayal of Jacob in the manner of behavior of the People's Progressive Party. A betrayal in more than one sense. In more than one sense. For example, the People's Progressive Party has contended it's a Marxist-Leninist party. And notwithstanding where it has gone in terms of its economic programs, at every Congress of the party, it has maintained that it has not changed its political ideology. Though we have seen some statements coming out of Barajak which suggest that there is change, but the party formally has not changed its political ideology. And its political ideology is grounded, I would say, Marxism-Leninism. And if one reviews where Marxism-Leninism stands on the question, again one sees one of the seminal works of Lenin, Что делать? What's to be done? That seminal work makes it clear that the political movement has got to find a way to work with the working people and the trade union movement, because that is where the working people are really located. They're located there in much larger numbers than they're located in any political party. That any political party which really wants to represent their interests has to associate itself with their body, and that's the trade union movement. So that all of this talk that we're hearing about politics and GTUC and all of that, and the GTU really represents a betrayal of where the PPP historically stood on the question of trade unionism. That is what it represents. So we need to understand that. So that there should never be a question of the relationship between a trade union body and a political party in the context of a party that is seeking to represent the interests of the working people. But having said that, let me fast forward immediately, because that represents a betrayal of Jagan and the PPP. But let me fast forward to say that even in the face of that contention, that theoretical and philosophical contention, that when one looks at the current situation, the issue that is before us is not an issue of a relationship between any party and the Ghana Teachers Union. That is not the issue. The issue is one of how do we treat with trade union rights and collective bargaining. That's the issue. And therefore, let me go back again. The PPP could be credited under the leadership of Jacob for being, among others, who struggled for the recognition of trade unions.
Yeah.
And we know what happened in the 60s in terms of the Trade Union Recognition Bill. We know what happened when Jacob came to power in terms of the Trade Union Recognition Bill. And so here we see again a betrayal of Jacob, because he can be seen as foremost in the struggle for trade union recognition. And here is his party being seen foremost in trying to de-recognize
More like demolish.
and demolish trade unions. So clearly the PPP has lost its way in terms of its founder and the ideology and philosophy it is supposed to have embraced, and has become an oppressive body that seeks to oppress the working people and to demolish and de-recognize the organ of the working people in their struggle. And so let me get back to the question of collective bargaining. This situation today is not about the associations have established is legitimate between a trade union and a political party. It's about not recognizing, because they want to dominate all of the space, all of the political space, a trade union. The the Ghana Teachers Union, I think it's 2 years ago, they have biennial elections. It's a duly registered body of the teachers, and the leadership is duly elected by those teachers in an election where we have heard absolutely no questions being raised about its conduct, so that those who are in leadership have been duly elected. They are the union which, under the laws of Ghana, are authorized to represent the teachers. They are representing the teachers in the context of collective bargaining. Now, there are two things that jump out at us. Everybody in the government and some others are talking about, well, why don't they wait, how much they've gotten in the past, and that kind of thing. That is not the issue. The issue is that they have a right under the laws of Ghana and the traditions of the trade union movement to be engaged in collective bargaining. And what this government has done is seeking to deny them that right. And in seeking to deny them that right, they are trying to fool the people of Ghana about the reality. It is true that there are some talks that have taken place, though those talks have not been conducted properly, between the teachers' union and the government in the person of the Ministry of Education. But it is also true that the Ministry of Education has made it clear to the teachers' union that they do not bargain in relation to salaries. They do not bargain in relation to salaries. And that bargaining in relation to salaries is conducted by the office of the president, and in fact, the president himself. And the fact of the matter is that the president has not afforded the teachers' union an opportunity to engage in a process which he has determined he should be involved in. And what he has done instead is to select some hand-picked people, take them to the State House, have a conversation with them, and deny Ghana Teachers Union the opportunity to do what they are legally entitled to do. And therefore, for all intents and purposes, that process of collective bargaining and negotiation has not taken place, has broken down in relation to salaries. And therefore, there's legal basis for the teachers union to, in the first instance, call for reconciliation, and hence they call on the Ministry of Labor to engage in that process. And we have that toothless bulldog in the person of the Minister of Labor saying that there are negotiations and it hasn't broken down. I mean, it's bastard for him to speak to this nation and to say that negotiations have not broken down when his president is the one and his Minister of Labor is the one who have said that negotiations on the matter of salaries ought to be conducted with the president, and the president has not entertained any such conduct of negotiations, and therefore has caused negotiations to break down. And hence, they correctly asked for reconciliation. He has denied them that legal right to reconciliation, and therefore they have embarked upon a strike as is tradition when negotiations have broken down and the process has not eventuated as it should.
Well, it appears as though there's a vacancy for Minister of Labor as we speak, because nothing flows from there. But I want to go back to where I started. And this is to reinforce the wider point that you made. Mr. Burnham's union, the British Guyana, Mr. Burnham's party, the British Guyana Labour Party, came out of that union. Mr. Jagan came out of the Political Affairs Committee. These two national giants advocated in the case of Mr. Jagan for the dock workers and later sugar workers. Mr. Burnham, generally the public service area. And their cause is recorded. Their works are recorded. Now, what we have is a situation where not only is there a betrayal, but there is a glaring manifestation of double standards. Dr. Jagan fought for these values and these rights for workers. The PPP seemed to have embarked on a tradition. You remember the 1999 strike, which lasted for 57 days. And Mr. Jagdeo, who was then, I believe, a junior minister of finance, said to the world that public servants were not going to get 1 black cent more. Those were his words as I recall them. And now, fast forward to 2024, we have a situation where the People's Progressive Party is threatening the workers, the teachers in this instance, that we're going to cut your pay. We're not going to pay you for the time that you don't work. Well, the court has said that until the hearing and determination of the matter, nobody's pay will be cut. We hear threats of termination of employment, termination of contracts of employment. We hear of the possibilities of criminal charges being instituted against persons who engage in quote unquote unlawful strike action. So, in the same way as the PPP of 1999 treated the public service strike, in very much the same way in 2024, the PPP of 2024 is treating the Guyana Teachers Union strike. Now, the Guyana Public Service Union has said, look, government, if you don't come to the table, you don't talk about collective bargaining as you have outlined, then the GPSU will bring out its members in solidarity with the teachers. Commentators have had lots to say about this, that if the public service union comes out, it means that there's a political attack against government, seeking to put the government in the back foot. There appears to be no clear understanding on the part of the government of how to treat with industrial relations matters, and particularly the industrial relations climate of today. Hence my earlier suggestion that there may very well be a vacancy in the office of Minister of Labor. Um, how do we get across this hurdle in the best interest of the people, the working people of this country?
First of all, say that there is a clear oxymoron historically, notwithstanding what I said earlier on about tear gun. Because we do have that historical moment where Jagan also said, not a said more. We do have that historical moment where he also said, not a cent more. The public service in the late 90s were also engaged in a struggle for wages and salaries. And we saw they got to the point where arbitration was appointed. So we saw due process in some regards manifested itself in the late 90s. And we had the arbitration, and the arbitration eventually awarded the public servants, I think it was 30 to 33, 30% increase. Now there's significant parallels to be drawn there. At that time, the government did not have the resources to pay the money. We saw there was an award and they were able to pay. And therefore, it shows that they were not truthful in their contention. They did not have the resources because they were able to find, to pay, and there were no devastating effects on the economy by virtue of the payment. But you know, today the PPP claims that what happened in that 99 period is their
generosity.
Their bold face. There's nothing about their generosity. They opposed it. This is only because the arbitration imposed that they paid that. So they cannot claim that it illustrated an interest or concern for the working people by that increase. That came through the struggle of the working people in 1999. So today, again, we see a claim being made that they don't have the resources at this time to make the payment. But I've made the point that the issue really doesn't start with the question of the resources. The issue starts with the right to bargain. Whether they have the resources or not is a matter that can be determined in the course of time, either through negotiations with them, through conciliation, and through arbitration. And it is these processes that they are fighting against and seeking to impose their will, as they sought to do, but unsuccessfully, in 1999. And so, again, I want to refocus on this question of what is it that's at the center of the issue today? Because a lot of people are off focus and looking straight at the question of affordability, rather than the question of due process, which is enshrined in our Constitution and our labor laws. And I want to make the point in that regard that when we come to speak about Lyndon Fobb Sampson Burnham, we need to remember that recognition of the Guyana Agricultural Workers Union came about under Burnham's regime. So here we can see clearly a disposition of Burnham to this matter that led to the recognition of a union that was associated with the political party, that was involved in a whole range of spontaneous illegal strikes. The GAW has a history up to today of calling strikes, going through the process of reconciliation and all of that. They can get one next morning, workers on the strike, and the union endorses it. It is what their history speaks of. The union gained recognition under the regime of Lyndon Johnson. And I do recall Burnham's disposition to trade unionism, because Winston, Minister of Labor, Carrington, he was a trade union leader as well. I think he was the trade union leader for the transport world. But he was also a member of the People's National Congress and also became the Minister of Labor. And I remember vividly Winslow Carrington at the PNC General Council in the presence of Burnham saying that his first loyalty was to the workers, and that necessary, if he had to confront his party on behalf of the workers, he would do so. And so there was a clear acceptance by the PNC and by Burnham of where the trade union movement was located in terms of the representation of the interests of the working people. And so Carrington was accommodated, was accepted, was recognized as a trade unionist and allowed to play his role in the trade union movement, even when it meant that he had to clash with the party to which he belonged. And Burnham took absolutely no action against him. So we see here a Burnham who, in the face of the conduct of business by the Guyana Agricultural Workers Union, still went ahead and ensured their recognition. I think Harry Lal, no? It was the chairperson of that union at that time, who eventually joined the People's National Congress. And we see his conduct in relation to Winslow Carrington, who clearly said to Burnham, openly in the General Council, my first loyalty is to the workers. And it doesn't matter what this party has to say. Once I think the workers are in the right, I will be on their side, even as I continue to be a member of this party. And challenged Burnham, and Burnham did absolutely nothing to interfere with him in his status of a trade union leader and his status as a member of the People's National Congress at a senior level. And in fact, he became the Minister of Labor.
Interesting, I believe. Something can be learned from that in the vacant office of Minister of Labor.
Much to be learned.
Arbitration in 1999 led to the award you spoke of. There were some other issues or some other tag-ons to the remuneration aspect of the award that were not honored by the People's Progressive Party. What, in fact, the People's Progressive Party did instead was to take to the National Assembly the essential services, the amendment that brought in essential services and locked them out from striking, in a sense. What the People's Progressive Party did in retaliation against the workers of this country following the successful 1999 57-day strike was to put in the laws of Guyana prohibitions, measures that prevented the exercise of the right to strike. Share with us, Mr. Alexander, your thoughts on this union busting approach using the laws of Guyana as the basis for hurting the labor movement. And if you have a moment to speak to the disregard for the aspects of the award of 1999, I believe it was the Armstrong Award.
First of all, let me say that in the face of the current action by the Ghana Teachers Union, we have heard some mountains from representatives of the PPP who are suggesting that that bill, which dealt with utilities,
Yes.
should be extended to include the teachers because they are quote unquote also an essential service. So that we see this regressive move by the PPP. We see this, it is not something that really was intended to deal with the delivery of services uninhibited to our people, but was intended to give them control and a mechanism not to engage the representatives of the working people on certain matters. I want to go a little further on this. There's a dynamics here that we need to understand that has some ideological underpinnings and some attitudinal underpinnings. We have today been talking all along about the working people. And you know, there's the assumption when we talk about the working people that once somebody works, they're a member of the working people. But there's a PPP interpretation that does not correspond with that. And it partly comes out of their Leninist orientation. Let's say that we're talking about the working people as akin to the working class. And definitionally, in the Leninist lexicon, the working class does not include people in the service sector. Only speaks to the people in the productive, the direct productive sector. So that subliminally, when the PVP talks about the working class, they're not really talking about the people in the service sector.
Well, legally, well, in terms of legislation, I have come to the understanding that the term worker in the industrial relations context in Guyana excludes the Guyana Police Force, the Guyana Fire Service, and the Guyana Prison Service.
That is true, but I'm not dealing here with the legals. I'm dealing with
I hear you.
their disposition, which is manifest in their actions. And their disposition is not to the service sector as the working class. And therefore, their attitude towards the service sector is manifestly different to their attitude towards, quote unquote, the working class they talk about. And so, for example, you can see, for example, in the issue of Gaisuko, the PPP says, you know, we owe these people.
They're the working class.
They're the working class. We owe them. And therefore, though the industry is not making a profit, we have a debt to them. And we have to continue to pay them that debt. Now, I'm not going to get involved in the issue of the contribution that the sugar workers have made to this economy. But I'm just making the point that there's differential treatment by the PPP to the people who they describe as a working class, as opposed to those who are not described as a working class. But I want to go further. I want to go further in this dynamic situation, because in that process, there is also an ethnic element. And this is a part of Ghana's problem. Even in the definition and the attitude, when it comes to the working class of the bauxite industry, and they're real workers, their treatment is different to the working class in the agricultural sector. And so we see there's also an ethnic bias in their actions and their quote unquote application of their own ideology. And so they treat the bauxite industry different to the manner in which they treat the sugar industry. And this treatment is manifest in various ways. And let me give an example of an issue when I myself confronted Cheney Jagan. The definition of the working class, as I said earlier on, is about the direct, productive workers. But the definition goes on to say that those persons, all that they have at their disposal is their labor. And therefore, they don't have a resort to anything else if they're not working and paid. Now, taking that definition, I raised the question on one occasion to Cheney Jagan, why is it that his party, that claims to be a Marxist party, claims to represent the working class, could not find it possible in the electoral process to put up candidates and represent the people of Linden? And this is a historical fact, that in our electoral processes, there are instances where the People's Progressive Party did not contest in Linden. I think it was more for the region than for the national, but did not contest in Linden. And therefore, they walked away from these people who were supposed to be, by their definition, the working class. And so I'm saying this again demonstrates the ethnic issue which finds itself into the body politics of our nation.
I want to piggyback on that. The People's Progressive Party has created advertisements, nice videos, and so on. And I know that you've dealt with the issue of unionism, workers, and political parties already. But in the context of the propaganda of the People's Progressive Party, you may wish to revisit it just for a brief moment. They have described the Guyana Teachers Union strike as racist and political. And when Mr. Jagdeo speaks about the People's National Congress, his favorite word seems to be racist. And when he speaks about persons standing up for their rights against a vindictive Jagali, as I call it, administration, his favorite word is racist when it comes to describing people who advocate for the rights and the rights of others. Comment, I'm sorry I had to break you there, but comment, if you will, please, on this whole question of the defining of the GTU strike as racist and political against the background of what you just said.
Well, first of all, let's accept to a very large extent that the teaching profession is populated by people of African descent, to a very large extent. It's populated, and I may go on to say dominated, by people of African descent. Secondly, the People's National Congress has historically been supported by people of African descent as well. And this has to do with what we seem not to want to recognize, and something that, in fact, the Burnham Foundation sought to speak to in our most recent symposium, where we said we should return to ground zero in terms of the politics of this country. When the People's Progressive Party was formed, there was a conscious understanding at that time that we needed to unite the races, and more specifically, the people of African descent and the people of Indian descent. And it's that consciousness that led to a conscious effort to ensure that in the leadership of the party, you had the leadership of the Indian community, so to speak, and leadership from the African community. So Guyana started off with a recognition that we were a plural society and that historically the British did things to divide us in their interests, and that we should come together to work unitedly if we were to confront the British and to gain independence, and beyond that, if we to build Guyana. So that's the platform. So that what Jagdeo is seeking to do is to de-recognize the historical facts of our country and to de-recognize the fact that his party has historically attracted Indo-Guyanese in a manner in which the People's National Congress has historically attracted people of African descent. And that this has nothing to do with racism. It has to do with the fact that even in the population of Guyana, we came at different times, separate groups, culturally different in many regards, and therefore naturally inclined towards leadership from our own group, naturally inclined. And that built upon that, the British did things that caused us to be confrontational towards each other. The manner in which they divided and ruled caused that confrontation. And therefore it required leadership to bring us together because of our common interests. But what Jagdeo continues to seek to do is to play upon that divide. An attempt in playing upon that divide, where there is a coming together of the people of African descent, to suggest that because they come together to the exclusion probably of others, that they're racist. Now, what does racism mean? Racism means that there is a psychological disposition of superiority to others. That's what racism means. And it goes on to mean that in pursuit of that psychological superiority, that you put institutional mechanisms and structures in place to give privilege to the superior race over the other race. Now, I would like Jagdeo to show me in which manner and form the PNC and or in this instance, the Teachers Union, have structures in place to suggest superiority. Clearly, even with its dominance, one can see that the teachers at large have come out because of a common interest that has nothing to do with party politics. And here I want to introduce the concept of party politics as opposed to politics. Anything that seeks to deal with power in terms of decision-making, influencing decisions and policies is by its nature political. But that it does not necessarily redound to party politics, because party politics is when a particular party is seeking to acquire office for the purpose of being able to make decisions on the national issues. But when a force seeks to impact decision-making in its interests, that's politics, but not necessarily party politics. So that here is Jagdeo trying to cross the line of understanding between politics and party politics. So yes, the GTU is involved in politics. Yes, GAU is involved in politics. Any trade union is involved in politics. But the extent to which these workers are struggling for wages and salaries, irrespective of which government is in place, because we saw the struggle under the APNU, we've seen the struggle now under the PPP. It is a political struggle by the workers for their benefit that is not a partisan party struggle. And that we need to understand. And so what we see is that in many regards, Jagdeo was no different to the British, trying to divide and rule so as to maintain his hold on power. And in that regard, he is closer to any concept of racism. And the extent to which a lot of his people speak to the teachers as if they are not equal contributors to this country, claiming that they don't want to. I have seen posts. These people don't want to work. They want money and all of that. It is racist because it is suggesting an inferior position of these people to others, and therefore invoking the concept subliminally of racism. So that really, if one wants to talk about racism, the person who is perpetrated and perpetuated a racist approach would be Jagdeo. And much of what he does is subliminal racism, divide and rule, in the context where the teachers are not seen as the working class and therefore are seen as inferior to the working class in relation to their contribution to the national economy. Because the PPP takes an economistic position which says, look, life is really about economic activity. And the economic activity here are the working people. Those people are not the working people. And in fact, often referred to by them in their lexicon as the petty bourgeoisie. And more specifically, they have been referred to in the past from an ideological perspective as being parasitic, as being those who are benefited from the production and the returns of production of the working people. And therefore, they're not themselves naturally entitled because they don't produce.
Notwithstanding the fact that they prepare, mold, educate all those.
Well, the fact
in
of the matter
productive
is the
sector.
way in which things have emerged ideologically, one now can no longer argue the case of the exclusion of the service sector. Because on one hand, the service sector is critical to the human resource development that is essential for production. And on the other hand, when one talks about development, one sees that things like education and so are clear indicators of development and contributors to development. And so it's no longer one can argue that it's only the working class who are the foundation of growth and development.
I want to ask you to do the impossible for us. Give us a sketch of Forbes Burnham, the labor leader, the working class friend, the advocate for the rights of people in exactly 2 minutes. That's all the time we have.
One needs to recognize that when Forbes Burnham formed the People's National Congress, he did not have the support of all the people of African descent. And that the African middle class to some extent, from then into the era of the WP, was unsupportive of Burnham. And they were unsupportive of Burnham because here was someone who was intellectual, who may have been seen in terms of social standing as middle class, not working class, but whose party attracted the working people, represented the working people, and therefore became the true representative of the working people in the context of a plural society where the working people straddled the ethnic groups. And so one could see that what Burnham did in terms of policies and programs was directed towards the working people, as opposed to merely that narrow definition of the working class. Burnham was the true representative of the working people and got into conflict with those who, on one hand, only wanted to represent the working class by a Marxist definition, and the others, on the other hand, who saw him as betraying his class because he represented the working people more than any others, as opposed to representing that status group called the middle class.
Final words on today's program, Nation Watch, from Mr. Vincent Alexander. He's soon to become, I believe, an elder of the party. Mr. Alexander is chair of the Burnham Foundation, and I'd like to thank you very much, sir, for taking time off from your busy schedule and perhaps even some rest after a very, very hectic night last night to appear on Nation Watch for us to discuss Burnham and labor relations.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. To discuss Burnham and labor relations, to discuss Burnham, an hour will never suffice. We have just scratched the surface.
Precisely. I thank you very much, and viewers, I'd like to thank you for joining us and staying the course of the program with us. We'll be back again with you next Sunday by God's grace. Until then, be safe and support the teachers in whatever way you can.